All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. So, I wasn't going to cover this particular topic. I had a patron approach me last week about it. I wasn't sure. I don't know if it was appropriate. I don't want to tarnish the legacy of one of the great musicians of all time, George Harrison, or I don't want to call attention to this situation because I don't want like his family to feel as though I'm picking on them. But here is the story. Okay. This iconic George Harrison album, All Things Must Pass. I think most critics would agree it's probably the greatest work by a solo Beatle, right? It's either one or two. It's way up there. Some people like Band on the Run. Okay, it's a great album. But All Things Must Pass is a whole bunch of music. It's a longer album, double length back in the old days. And it's recently been updated, which I hate. Please stop remixing these original songs. Please stop doing it. Just if you want to clean up the audio, you want to remaster, I don't really have a problem with that. However, once you start tweaking things and they have and re-EQing and all this stuff, it does change the original sound. They're trying to make everything just bigger and louder when you hear it, and it's not necessarily better. All right. There's no reason to make a great analog recording sound like some digital piece of crap that comes out now. Okay. So that's my commentary on, the new All Things Must Pass. So this is kind of mind boggling. And keep in mind, the estate of George Harrison is run by his son and by his widow. So here's the announcement from this company called Dadgrass. Okay. It's a cannabis company. And they say they've got this exclusive partnership with the Harrison estate for a brand new All Things Must Grass, a play on the landmark All Things Must Pass. This is a huge boost, not only for Dadgrass, but for the cannabis industry as a whole. So what they're saying is now that we've got this iconic name, this iconic brand, and we're spoofing it, so now people are going to think of the album and go, hey, man, it's All Things Must Grass. We can go get some grass and put on the album, man. And this is the only way you can really enjoy this. And the two things go together. And this is what George would have loved. I doubt it. I'll be getting to that, though. All Things Must Pass. It's a huge boost for the company. If any member of the Beatles considers cannabis a worthy partner for their hallowed name, you can bet others will follow suit. So they're basically saying that this is just phase one. Maybe we can get some other Beatles on board and we can spoof some of their great works or other musicians, right? I mean, George Harrison passed away a long time ago. He was only 58 years old when he died. I'm sure, if he didn't smoke a lot of cigarettes and possibly a lot of cannabis, he might still be here. He had a very aggressive form of lung cancer. So can you see where I'm going with this? This is not the most tasteful thing. And quite honestly, again, I'm kind of surprised that the estate went all in with this because it's goofy. All Things Must Grass. I mean, I guess the whole 420 concept, which, by the way, we just celebrated the other day, 420. My kids think I don't know what it is. And I'm just like, duh. This just cheapens the whole thing. This cheapens the album. It cheapens the name of George Harrison to some degree. But of course, he's not here to defend himself. So he's relying again on his widow and his son. And, his widow and son seem like really decent, nice people. So this, again, to me, is just a bit tone deaf. Although, again, some people may think this is the greatest idea, right? And it's pure unfettered capitalism at its finest. Yeah. Dadgrass co-founders Ben Starmer and Joshua Katz have a brand partnership now with Harrison that they say is a dream come true. A dream come true. George Harrison, and this part here comes the corporate BS. George Harrison is the definition of the word classic. The music that he made was both timely and timeless. It crosses cultures. It crosses generations. And it seems to get better with every listen. Could you say any more platitudinal things than that? No. I mean, it gets better with every listen. And it's timeless and timely. Well, it can't be both. I mean, maybe it can be. The point is, all of this stuff is just, hey, we're just so glad to have that brand name. We will say anything. We will write any. It's like a political speech here. It's a whole bunch of words that say really nothing. Typical political gobbledygook, right? So our humble little weed brand has only been around a couple of years, but our dream is that one day, 50 years from now, people will say similar things about us. So they essentially want to be as iconic and timely and as timeless as George Harrison. That's their goal. The weed company. They want to be on par with George Harrison. I got news for the weed company. They may not survive the next 50 years. Maybe they will. If they do, good for them. But I guess, the way to build a brand is to kind of piggyback on someone else's brand. Let's just be honest. I mean, the Beatles individually and collectively are a brand. Their works are all essentially part of that brand. And if a private company is allowed to grab hold of one of the most iconic albums in the entire Beatles canon, then they're jumping for joy. This is almost like when a company acquires the publishing. Hey, I just got all of Bob Dylan's songs, paid like, I don't know, 500 million bucks. I got all of Dylan's songs, and now I can do what I want with these songs. And I'm going to make a ton of money from this. This is kind of similar to that. And obviously the estate, I'm sure, gets a cut. I'm just not sure George Harrison, I'm almost positive George Harrison wouldn't be involved in this. I mean, they say that George is the definition of the word classic. No, George was cantankerous. George was independent. George was stubborn, right? And he had all of these great characteristics. He was contrarian. Everybody was going this way. You even look at the Beatles, right? Paul, John, they're kind of going this way. George goes the other way. I mean, his music, that's why it's so amazing, because he had all these great musical ideas independent from, Lennon and McCartney. And I find that to be very relatable to what this is here, in a sense that this is like the Lennon and McCartney company that's coming along to buy out the great George Harrison and to say, hey, you had a lot of great things going for you, George. We're just going to incorporate you into the corporate Borg. And now we're going to market your name and your album title out there as All Things Must Grass. So now every time you light up one of our amazing products, right, you're essentially going to start thinking, hey, it's grass, like pass, like, hey, maybe I should go listen to All Things Must Pass right now. And yes, I understand when the album came out, I'm pretty certain a lot of people were enjoying their low-grade cannabis back in 1971, 72, 70, whenever. And that's fine and dandy. But to link the two just shows a real lack of decorum and some pretty tone deaf judgment on the part of the estate. That's all I can say on it. So anyway, so they hope that their brand, their weed brand, will be as iconic as George Harrison in 50 years. They go on to say, we keep things easy and dependable, never fancy or complicated. The way smoking grass used to be back when George recorded his 1970 album, All Things Must Pass. So they essentially compare the way they do business with the way George recorded the album. Wow. So why did they go back and try to remix and fix what was wrong with the album when there was nothing wrong with it? That's just another little tangent I went off on here. The creative direction for the collection centers around the 1970s album artwork, song lyrics, and song titles. We feel incredibly privileged to have been given the opportunity to do this with a record that we all hold so dear. Being able to take the gnomes, which are also present on the All Things Must Pass album cover as George himself, and bring them to life with the blessing of the estate is one example of how we translated this scary privilege into something fun and lighthearted. Hopefully, a mix of reverence and playfulness George would have enjoyed. We're also clearly into dad jokes and puns, so we're particularly proud of the silly play on words that we used for this collection. Just saying and seeing All Things Must Grass puts a smile on our faces. Being able to look at that in the original album font, no less, is a dream come true. So they've given all of this intellectual property, the fonts, the gnomes, the entire look of this album, not just the fact that they used All Things Must Pass. This is like a sacred album, and you're just giving it over to a pot company. It's what you're doing. Here, use the branding and then put it out there, and George would have loved it. The playfulness, the lightheartedness, the puns, he would have, this is something George would have loved. Really? I just don't see it that way. I find this to be crazy. Again, folks, George Harrison, 58 years old, could still be here now if he didn't smoke. And he smoked all kinds of stuff, right? We know this. And toward the end of his life, I'm pretty sure he had a message for people who were smoking. Now, again, for those of you who think cigarettes are different from smoking other things, there are still carcinogens that go in your body when you smoke something. I don't think the human body was designed for that. Now, you have I'm libertarian. You can do what you want. I mean, if you want to take that risk, but it's weird because George isn't here. And I would say, nah, if I'm looking at this, if somebody comes to me and I'm a member of the estate and they say, hey, we've got this great business venture, but we need the name of this album. And we're a cannabis company and we're going to encourage people to smoke. Well, dad or my husband, and this, if you're his widow, passed away from lung cancer. So I don't think this is really a good idea. I appreciate it, but I don't think if George were here, he'd want you to do that. You know, say George had multiple surgeries and they were somehow able to get the cancer out and he had survived. Would he want to promote a product that might send people to the same place that he was at, even though he survived? I doubt it. And because he's not here, he can't really speak for himself. He's got to rely on his son and his widow. And I think they made a mistake here. I think they made a mistake. As much as the people who were listening to that album at the time might sort of be just okay with this because it sounds funny or it sounds cool, think it through. Think it through. I know there are a lot of people who weren't there in the 60s and 70s and probably think to themselves, what's the big deal? I mean, you get fentanyl all over the place, right? These days, I mean, pot, that's harmless. And this is a good way, of course, to market. And if George was okay with it, then I'm okay with it too. Well, we don't know if George would have been okay with it. We know his estate is okay with it. And I think everybody is probably going to make a lot of money off of this. Again, my question for the estate is, did you really need this? Did you really need this money? I don't think they did. I think this is a bit off the rails. And as much as I didn't want to cover this because I don't want to offend the Harrison estate or anybody who maybe put their stamp of approval on this, thinking it might be a good venture, or they might have thought, hey, what's the harm in doing this? And I'm not going to really examine it all that much. But in hindsight, I think there are a lot of people who probably feel as though it's a bridge too far. You know, I would not, knowing George Harrison's legacy, I would not do this. I just wouldn't do it. But I don't know, time goes by and people think that they can just merge with this corporate beast, and they don't expect any kind of negative feedback from anybody. And maybe I'm all alone on this. I think I've seen another person online talking about this, and I wasn't as incensed until I really dug into this and I talked to a few people, and they said, maybe you should do some commentary on this. So I decided to jump in. In any event, it's a wonderful album. The whole concept of it should be left alone. And it just should be this work of art that stands on its own. George doesn't need any help. These people need George more than George would need these people, right? But his estate feels differently. So that's how I see this one. You may disagree. You may think, oh, what's the big deal, man? Just get off of this. I mean, this is cool. And I'm sure a bunch of younger people out there are going to say, yeah, this is cool. All Things Must Pass. And then I'm scratching my head going, no, it's All Things Must Pass. It's this amazing album. And now you're ruining it. I mean, imagine if Don Henley signed a contract with Marriott, right? And Don Felder got in on it, and Glenn Frey's widow. And they said, you know, we'd like you to market a whole bunch of these Hotel California places all over the country. Could you imagine Don Henley doing that? No bleeping way. And I think George, in a lot of ways, I mean, they're two very different people, George Harrison, Don Henley. But I don't think George Harrison would want his brand, in this case, pimped out to a corporation. I mean, Don Henley could probably make millions of dollars, right? I'm going to the hotel, except the fact that you can check in, right? But you can't leave. That's the problem with the Hotel California concept, right? You go and you're stuck there forever. And with All Things Must Pass, he's sending a message that things can't always be the way you think they're going to be. And in this case, the corporate beast, they're always going to be the way they are. And they're always going to be looking for someone's art to ruin. And in this case, that's exactly what's happening. So yeah, that's my video on the topic. And I'm probably in the minority, but I will proudly stand with George Harrison's legacy over any kind of cannabis exploitation here, because it's just bizarre. Just leave George alone. But too late. It's his estate and they have control, and that's what they're doing. So see you soon.